Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Soul Brothers. This is the Apostle Paul here with John the Beloved. as we do. Seriously, this is. So, for anybody who doesn't know this, so Nathan was in North Carolina last week. Just an amazing, at least last weekend for what, 3-4 days?
Yeah.
And I think the entire state came alive with your presence. We had people coming out of the woodwork to see him, lining up around the corner. It was like Jesus has visited. So it was awesome. And so other than the fact that I got to see you in person, that was also awesome.
Yeah.
But so we're sitting in. So Nathan visits the church that we're currently going to. Shout out to Michael Wallace. Last weekend, and so we're sitting there on Sunday morning next to each other, and suddenly it hits me out of this whole epiphany moment where you are completely John the Beloved, and I am
Yes.
completely Paul.
It's totally true. It's totally true. If you guys don't know, like, Keith feels nothing ever typically. And he's very he
If
likes
I
to
do,
burn.
watch out. It's big time.
We call him like the Human Torch from Fantastic Four, because he just likes to burn down all the religious nonsensical crap that everyone posts, especially on social media. Like, he wrote something the other day that I saw it, I laughed out loud so hard. Like, in the middle of the store, my wife's like, "Stop it, you're embarrassing me." It's so funny. But I'm not like that. I'm a total lover. I don't like to burn down stuff like Keith does. I mean, I like to, but in love for. And Paul was, kind of like that. The way Paul talked was just like, he didn't really seem to care what anybody thought. He's like, "Go ahead and chop your privates off." Like, he said things like that. He used words that were certainly questionably swear words. I mean, yeah, he's just crazy like that. Paul just was like, "I'm so sick of this crap." Like, he was just like, lower the boom. And then John the Beloved, of course, is the one that cuddled with Jesus. And if it weren't for John, we would not know that God is love, because God is love is only found a couple of times, both in First John. And so we wouldn't even know that outside of John the Beloved. And he's a super fast runner. We know that's true, too.
Yeah,
He
and he
outran
blew past Peter.
Yeah, he's like, "See you later, man. Jesus is risen. I'm out of here." I'm such a lover. I just love people, even to a detriment. I think sometimes, like, it's good that I have my wife who has very good discernment, because I mean, it's like I have good discernment, but I love people so much I will blind myself to the fact that they're super screwed up people. And then my wife will always be like, "Hubby, they're super screwed up people." And I'll be like, "Oh yeah, okay."
And you're like, "I love them. I still love them. I just love them."
I know, that's how I do. I'm always like that. Okay, boundaries. Okay, this person I can love, but from like across the room.
Yeah, and as I shared that revelation with Nathan, we go back into worship songs, and suddenly, like, this complete image pops into my head, and I wasn't sure I was going to be able to control myself laughing, which just isn't a good thing. That's not a good look in the middle of service, right? But like this whole image of Nathan reclining, laying down like close to Jesus and looking him in the eyes and saying, "I'm a lover, not a fighter," kind of in his best Michael Jackson voice.
Yes. Yeah.
And then you flash forward to me in a different scene out in the street screaming, "Hell no, castrate them all,"
Yeah.
Like,
it's so true.
Oh, man. Well, go ahead.
I was going to say, we got to start laughing in church. We actually talked about last night. We went to my church, and we had just ended a 3-day fast and everything. As a church, we had this big potluck and stuff, which was awesome. I got really sick, though, because I hadn't eaten nothing. And then I ate all this stuff, and I was like, "Oh, that's stupid." But anyway, there's a guy there who's actually the youth pastor. His name's Colton. And he started like holy laughtering, which they have no clue about any of that. Like, he just kind of started laughing.
Okay.
And he actually came up to the mic and he goes, "I don't know what's wrong with me." He's like, and he wasn't being, distracting or, super loud about it. In fact, I didn't even know he was laughing at all until he went up to the mic and you could hear he's trying to hold it back. And he's like, "I don't know what's going on." He's like, "I just can't stop laughing." Oh, they never even heard of like holy laughter or any of that stuff.
Wow.
Yes, but he was like laughing. And he's trying to hold it down, but he's kind of like laughing and crying at the same time. He's just having this encounter. But then Drew, he's the pastor of our church, just a great guy. He gets up there and says something that I have thought many times in my life, is that you could come into church and you can be miserable and depressed and cry a lot, and that's called holy. But as soon as you laugh, they think you have a demon and will throw you out in the street. So like depression is praised and joy is considered demonic. I mean, is that weird or what?
How terrible is that? I mean,
Yeah.
that's exactly how kingdom is defined, right?
Yeah.
Depression and
Right.
unrighteousness and strife.
Self-loathing.
That's it. Good grief.
Yes. But think about that. Like, I remember I was a part of the Toronto Blessing in terms of I went to the Toronto Blessing a lot. And you would hear a lot of people laughing, and they would laugh. And this happened in our meetings, like our youth meetings with kids that had never seen anything like that before. They would laugh for like 3 or 4 hours straight. I mean, they would not stop. You know, they'd be done. Their stomachs are hurting. Their like cheeks are killing them, you know. And all the religious people were just like, oh, that's demonic. You know, and I thought, really? I mean, I had a kid that wanted to take their own life an hour ago, came into service, laughed for 4 hours, and are so filled with the joy of the Lord they can't stop themselves. But because it's disruptive or doesn't sound like what you like, it's demonic. What was the other stuff?
Yeah,
You
that's
know?
insane.
You know?
That's just insane.
Yeah.
I mean,
But think about it. Is that not how it is?
well, yeah. I mean, yes, and it shouldn't be that way. But how it should be is exactly the way you described for those people who were hit with that holy laughter. I mean, isn't that a natural response to feeling joy?
Yes. Well, I think like, you know, I mean, obviously there's, and I know because I lived through the whole thing, there were times when it was out of order. You know what I mean? In terms of, there were times where it was distracting and you could tell it wasn't really God as much. It kind of shifted over into the flesh a little bit, kind of like a look at me type situation. So you could definitely feel that, and you can definitely see that when that occurred. And, you know, so what? I mean, that's going to happen sometimes. Like people are, you know, not everybody's going to walk purely in the spirit 100% of the time. I mean, but anyway, but most of the time, you know, it's just God, you know, moving on people, and it was beautiful, and it was amazing to see people get set free and laugh like that. It was just so cool. And then all the religious people, they just couldn't handle it, you know.
That's crazy. Well, those are the very people I pray get to experience it, so so that they truly understand.
Yeah,
Wow,
that
this is
happened,
freeing.
by the way.
Oh, really?
Oh my gosh, I should tell you the story. Like this will totally fit into this so I had this kid once, and he was just a religious he's kind of a jerk, really, and I didn't like him at all. But he came to the church all the time, you know. I'm not even sure why he kept coming, because all he would do is criticize, and he'd kind of sit in the back with his arms folded. But he kept showing up every week. You know, he's like this
kind of
17-year-old
redundant.
kid.
He's religious and a jerk. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I should say the same thing.
It's nighttime and it's dark. Yeah, no joke.
Yeah, exactly. He's white and Caucasian. Okay, so he's sitting in the back, like with his arms crossed, right? He was like a Calvinist, I think. I think he claimed to be a Calvinist anyway, and everything we did was wrong, you know. And I kept being like, dude, whatever, man. So one night, so he kind of started coming before the revival, like kind of like right in the beginning. So the revival hits, right? And one night, it is like laughing. I mean, people are just like, there's like 15 kids laughing for 4 hours. You know, I mean, it was crazy. You just leave them on the floor laughing. It was awesome. Like, and so he comes up to me afterwards, this scowl on his face, and he goes, I don't think that's God. And so I kind of looked at him, and I was just like, okay, you know, whatever, you know. I mean, I was just like, all right, you can think whatever you want. I didn't even remember engaging with him at all. So then he would always come. In fact, I think how he actually came was that we had a Bible study on Tuesdays, right? So youth groups on Thursday. So that happened on Thursday. All these kids, 15 kids laughing, whatever. Or Tuesday rolls around. We have our Bible study. And in the middle of the Bible study, I mean, God shows up in power, right? I don't even remember how it happened. I just remember I was like reading the scriptures, and all of a sudden kids start sliding out of their chairs. I mean, I was just like, what is going on? And I look over, and I don't see this kid. His name was Bryce, and I don't see this kid, right? And I'm like, what the heck happened, you know? And I'm like, where did he go? And I look over, he had slid off of his chair, and he's underneath the chairs laughing. You know, so I come over to him, and I look down at him, and I go, I don't think that's God. And he's like, "Shut up!" Like, it was hilarious. Yeah,
Oh,
I was like, "I don't
man.
think that's God." And he just like laughed at me, and I mean, just laughed. He's like, he couldn't stop like laughing. Of course, he gets up, and that was the end of his objection to the Lord moving like that.
Yeah, that was kind of an I get it moment,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
well, in keeping with the discussion of the contrast between lovers and fighters and village burners and snugglers, I don't know a different
yes.
way to put that. Let's talk about what Hulk Hogan, Nature Boy Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, and Jacob all had in common. They were all wrestlers.
Yes, yes, they were.
So, oh, speaking of which, this is a total tangent, not a shocker to everybody, but one of the first people we met when we moved to North Carolina was Nikita Koloff. Do you remember him?
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I doubt he remembers me, but he became an acquaintance years ago. He was a friend of a friend, and man, you talk about a cool guy who loves
Really?
Jesus. Yeah. So
Wow.
there we go. Total tangent, but let's do, if you will, talk about Jacob and talk about wrestling. You know, I've heard the whole Jacob wrestled with God positioned 1,000 different ways, and I'm sure you can guess what every one of those are.
Oh, yeah.
But you know what I would like to talk about today, if you don't mind, is what in the heck was that about? Like what does it mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean to wrestle with God? How did Jacob wrestle with God? And I have a few more questions in addition to that, but let's start there.
Well, I think it'd be good to. I mean, I don't know. I may have heard it's positioned 100 different ways. So, but probably there's a key, like a one way that I've heard it the most. But I don't know how you've heard it. Like if somebody were to give a sermon, they're like, "This is how you wrestled with God," or "This is how Jacob wrestles," or how have you heard it? Like, like actually preached.
Yeah, I think that I've heard some variations on the actual wrestling. I've heard it was a Christophany, so I've heard it was
Yeah, yeah.
a foreshadowing of Jesus or Jesus himself rather. I've heard that it was God. I've heard it was Holy Spirit. I've heard that it was genuinely a wrestling match. Like suddenly Jesus just wanted to wrestle. He's like, hey,
Yeah,
this
like
is
my boys.
this is my guy. I'm taking him
Yeah,
down with a figure four off the top rope. Watch this, and
Hulk Hogan leg drop.
yeah, and Jacob was so stubborn and so single-minded that he said, "Not gonna happen. You're not winning this one," and just held on. And they physically grappled for hours on end until Jesus just got worn out, man. God just got worn out and said, "You know what? I'm going to stop this. So I'm going to reach over and pop, snap a little something in the hip, and that'll make sure he lets me go." Almost like sweeping the leg in Karate Kid.
Yeah, yeah.
And then
Sweep the leg.
sweep
Yeah.
the leg. And then, he's like, "Okay, you got it. I'm going to bless you because of that. I'm gone, and that's it." So that's everything kind of aligns with that in summary. But then the second half of it is, of course, the fast more, pray more, do more crowd runs with the whole hip issue. Yes, and
Hip issue.
Yeah, the hip issue.
This is a hip issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hippies. So, it's generally they position it as something to the effect of, "Hey, listen, you want to be close to God, you got to get in there and wrestle and go through that pain. And he's going to leave you with a mark that's going to make you limp. He's going to actually physically change you in a negative way to prove that you're close to him." So there's that whole pain and suffering bent to that they take.
The wilderness.
Yeah. So that's really where most of that preaching goes. And then I've actually heard some other preachers or teachers or whomever, right, people in the pulpit or on the platform, really kind of avoid it. They kind of glance over it. They kind of run past the whole thing. Oh yeah, and it's almost like a setup to a whole different message, and that's as deep as you go.
Yeah.
Oh, and Jacob wrestled with God, and he's got the limp to prove it. Now let me tie it into something that has nothing to do with that for the next hour and a half, right? So,
Right.
but it really does. I mean, when you read it, if you don't understand what you're reading, and I'm sure most of us don't, the first time we
Right.
look at it, you've got to go, what the heck is this about? How did he actually wrestle? Was it an actual person that he wrestled with? Was it a
Yeah.
spirit? Was it something else entirely that he was wrestling with? So, that's kind of how I've heard it positioned and why some of these questions come up.
And was it like wrestling in the Olympics or like WWE wrestling?
Well,
Like what kind of wrestling are we talking about?
yeah, well, I mean, since the New
You know?
Testament was written in Greek, it had to be Greco-Roman wrestling. It couldn't be.
Oh, dun. That was awesome. Yeah, I've definitely heard it. Of course, I grew up with the God just tortures you constantly, and that's all he does, except for maybe forgive you, sort of, occasionally. And I mean, this is how I was raised. Like, if there was a prosperity gospel, I was raised in the torture gospel. So,
That's
I mean, I was
terrible.
taught to believe God is ever going to bless you with anything ever is heresy. I mean, that's all I ever heard was that God
Wow.
tortures you and tortures you and tortures you, and that's all he does. Now, when you die, you get to go to heaven, or if you get raptured, and of course, the rapture is at the end of the tribulation. I mean, that had to be the case because God's got to torture you through the tribulation as well. And of course, this is the only way your character gets stronger is if God sends you to a wilderness for 30 years, and this is required. So this is like all I knew of God. Like, so I don't remember. I don't think I even ever prayed for anything from God, or
Wow.
almost nothing, until I was probably like 30 before I actually asked God for anything or prayed for anything for myself, because that was selfishness. So if you ever pray for anything for God for yourself, that's selfish. And then if you're selfish, he'll have to torture you even longer. Right. So I was so careful to not pray a prayer for myself because that would evidence selfishness. And I didn't want to get tortured any longer than I had to. And, that kind of thing. So, of course, this, as every Old Testament or narrative, was really along the lines of the pray more, fast more, do more, serve more, give more crowd, which was posited to me as, well, if you're really going after God, if you're really going to seek him, he's going to beat the crap out of you, is basically how it was positioned
Wow.
to me. Yeah, he'll have to hurt you very, very deeply. And Tozer was quoted to me on this. Actually, I heard Tozer quoted when someone was preaching this passage, which sucks because I really love Tozer. He's probably one of my favorite writers. I mean, the pursuit of God, the knowledge of the holy, like Tozer's amazing. Like I absolutely love him. But he has this quote, and I don't even remember the context of the quote, but his quote is this. If God, how do you put it? For God to use you wholly, he must wound you deeply. So they would quote that Tozer quote and apply it then to the passage of Jacob wrestling with God. I mean, God has to hurt you really badly in order to use you. So this is how it was always thrown in my court. Was that sort of understanding. So it's funny because like I'll talk to people that never heard anything like the torture you forever thing in the wilderness, their whole lives, or they've just recently heard it, and yet this was like my bread and butter, growing up.
Wow. So you didn't go where I thought you were going to go as you started laying it out. I thought you were going to say that somebody tried to draw a parallel between wrestling with God, surviving the tribulation, and then, breaking your hip and okay, now I've rescued you because you survived the hip breaking, because you survived the tribulation. You get to come on home. I thought that's where you were going to go with
Well,
what
that
you
that
had
was
been taught.
definitely
So,
that was definitely part of it too. And the scriptures quoted were like, he who perseveres to the end will be saved.
hmm.
So you just have to endure the torturous life that we're all living. Uh, you know, until you die, or Jesus comes back, like one of those two things. And the only promises of God are promises to torture you and send you to heaven when you die. Like those are the only promises I ever heard.
Wow.
I'm not kidding here. Like that's literally the only promises. Now maybe there were other promises people talked about in the church environments that I grew up in, but I don't remember. Like all I'm saying is that's all I remember.
Mm-hmm.
So if anything else was taught, it wasn't taught loudly enough for me to actually remember it at all. And it was a weird thing for me too, because my mom was so joyful.
Yeah.
She just was so joyful and so loving and so she's the most joyful person you ever meet in your life. And I was kind of like that too. I was a naturally positive, joyful person. But I think most of the stuff I just kind of like was like, well, that sucks, and just kind of just kept going. You know what I mean? Like I didn't really think all that hard enough about it to be like, well, I really should be miserable.
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't cross my mind.
Well, let's talk about what it really meant for Jacob to wrestle with God.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, no, I was just saying, if you want to go to it, in order to understand even the whole narrative, you kind of have to start in the beginning, right? Which is, we don't have to actually go to the passages. We could just talk about it, because most people are probably pretty familiar with it. So you remember when Jacob was conceived, and he was conceived not by himself, right? He had Esau with him in there. And do you remember what the Lord basically prophesies over him and his brother at that time?
That one would serve the other. The former would serve the latter, essentially.
Yeah.
Correct?
So he basically it gets prophesied over him that the younger one's actually going to be the one who will basically is the chosen one, right? He's the chosen one with whom all the blessings of God are going to flow through, that his descendants will be numerous as the stars or whatever. And it's really interesting because it does say that. It says the older will serve the younger. But the problem with that is that either is a false prophecy or we're not understanding it correctly, right? So if you go ahead and go to Genesis 32, now this is a long later. The Genesis 32 is actually where you get the account of the wrestling and everything. But if you see by this point in their lives, and ask yourself if that Esau serving Jacob line actually makes any sense here. Okay, so you ready for this? So we have this prophetic word that God says Esau, the older will serve the younger, which would have been completely the opposite of what an ancient Near Eastern tradition would have been. So if you look at this, verse 32, Genesis 32:1, and this is, of course, years later, says this: Now as Jacob went on his way, the angels of God met him. Jacob said when he saw them, this is God's camp, obviously, because the angels are there. So he named that place Mahanaim. Verse 3, Then Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He also commanded them, saying, Thus you shall say to my lord Esau. How does that strike you there, Keith?
Unusual.
And why would that be unusual?
Well, because if you say my lord, generally it in this context, it generally means someone to who you are in their service, correct?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is Lord. Like, I am in subjection to him. Well, what happened to the older serving the younger crap? Like, where's that? That doesn't seem to be the case by this time, does it?
No.
And then it goes on further than that. Thus says your servant Jacob? Whoa. I thought the older is supposed to serve the younger, and Jacob refers to himself as the servant. Does that strike you as odd?
Yeah.
Yep, it sure is.
Did nobody tell? Was Jacob not aware of what he was supposed to be doing here? So
see, there it is. I mean, there it is right there. Either Jacob was not aware of the word, or he did not trust the word. So let's go ahead and keep reading, because I think it's going to really be eye-opening. as we kind of get through this thing. So then you have to, we'll recount, because we're going to have to, like, the history of Jacob up to this point. But it's really interesting. So he says, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban, right? That's his uncle.
Mm-hmm.
You remember this?
Mm-hmm.
And stayed until now. I have oxen and a whole bunch of other junk. So then he says this, the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, verse 6. And furthermore, he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, right? Because he hadn't seen his brother in like a super long time. And they certainly didn't leave on good terms. And so he's like, like, my brother's come. He's got 400 dudes. Like, what do I do? Right? He starts panicking.
Mm-hmm.
And he says he divided the people who were with him and the flocks and the herds and the camels into 2 companies. For he said, if Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, the other company can take off. So he basically splits his people so that if Esau goes all bloodthirsty on him, at least some people won't die. So then it says this, verse 9. So then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your relatives, and I will prosper you. I love that. He's like, reminds him that he reminds God that, hey, you told me to come out here and you said you prosper me, and it looks like I'm going to die.
Essentially, he's saying, Lord, you realize I'm at this spot because of you, right?
Yeah, like, this is your fault. You told me to come here, and I just want to remind you they told me that this would be okay. So verse 10, he goes, I'm actually unworthy of all the loving kindness and of the faithfulness which you have shown to your servant. That's
covenant language, by the way.
Yeah, definitely. And he says, for with my staff only I crossed this Jordan, and now I've become 2 companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I'm scared that he'll come and he'll attack me. And the mother's, he's like, afraid I'm just going to kill my wife and kids. That's what he says. For you said, I will surely prosper you and make your descendants to the sand of the sea, right? So he's like kind of reassuring himself, okay, everything looks really, really bad, but I want you to remind you that you said that this was going to happen. So don't let everyone get killed, basically is what he says. So he does what he said. He sleeps on it, and then he kind of comes up and wants to present his brother this big gift. So he lists all the stuff he wants to give him. And all that. So then he says this, verse 17, he commanded the one in front, saying, when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong and where are you going? And to whom do these animals in front of you belong? Then you shall say, these belong to your servant Jacob. It is a present again, sent to my lord Esau. And behold, he is behind us. So in other words, just tell him that this is from Jacob. It's a gift to Esau. Then he commanded the third and second, and he basically says the same thing. So verse 20, he says, I will appease him with the present that goes before me, because he's thinking his brother's harboring like bitterness and anger towards him. Then afterward, I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So then, of course, what follows after this is the wrestling situation. So what's your reaction to this so far?
Well, so far, 2 thoughts. One, we've already touched on. Does Jacob not realize what was spoken over him, the promise?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And number 2, whether he realizes it or not, to your point, this is a guy who lacks complete confidence, period.
Yes.
His self-perception, his perception of Esau is also incorrect. Yes. Right? His understanding
mm-hmm.
of whatever authority he might have or carry is completely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And to me,
yes,
when I said that's covenant language, loving kindness and faithfulness, right? That is
mm-hmm.
chesed, right? It is love.
Yes, chesed.
So it
yes.
is, forgive my Alabama pronunciation of Hebrew. But, I mean, it's almost like he recognizes God's side of the covenant relationship, but he doesn't recognize what that has done to or for him. That's how it hits me.
And it's interesting you say that, because that's 100% what we're seeing right here.
Oh, awesome.
So, yeah, I mean, you have to ask yourself, like, Jacob had some pretty hardcore, ironclad promises. So either he was just unaware of those promises, or he didn't believe them. It's one of the two. Because when you look at his life from day one, And of course, Jacob means it literally means heel grabber, but but the understanding of that is like deceiver or liar. And when you look back on his life, like, okay, so he's either ignorant or he just simply doesn't believe. So think about what he did right off the bat. He is already told that, hey man, I'm coming to you. I've chosen you. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to give you everything over your older brother. And what's the first thing he does based on his mother's unction? Do you remember?
Oh, earlier before he left?
Yeah, like
Yeah,
before he leaves.
when he tricks his dad into the blessing? Is that where we're going with this?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, he
He
tries to
tricks
present
his dad.
himself as his older brother to get a blessing.
Exactly. So he basically takes advantage of his brother. You remember this in his
Hmm.
moment of like hunger?
Yeah,
And then
gives
he
away his
deceives his
birthright.
father. Yes. My question to you is this: what did God already say about the birthright?
Yeah, he already said it was his.
He already said it was his.
So he's trying to obtain something that he already had.
Correct. So God already had a covenant with him that said, I'm going to do this for you. So he either doesn't understand what the covenant says or he doesn't know what it says. So he either is ignorant or he just doesn't trust God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, something else occurs to me as well here. We've talked about this before, about how names now, Carl, Ralphie, whatever you want to call somebody, it's just
Right.
kind of it's kind of a tag to identify somebody. Oh, I know who you're talking
Right.
about. But
Right.
that's not the way it used to be. It used to be truly a piece of your identity, right? So if that's the case, how closely did Jacob identify with his given name, right?
Mm-hmm.
Liar,
Right.
or not just heel grabber, but right. So if he had that, if he truly identified with that, with what he was
Mm-hmm.
called,
Mm-hmm.
then it would also explain how he could justify even that. I'm gonna kind of trick him into giving me his
Mm-hmm.
birthright. I'm gonna trick my dad into
Right.
this and go along with that. And by the way, when I come back years later to face my brother, it's under that dark cloud of that's how
Mm-hmm.
this went down, because I that's who I am. I'm just a liar. So I'm going to have to kind of grovel and go back and be the lesser of the two, which is really honestly who I am.
Yes. So you see that entire thing playing out here, every single thing he said.
Hmm.
It's like God came to him, told him who he was. You're the giver, you are the receiver of the birthright, which would have been completely upside down for ancient Near Eastern culture. So God comes, he makes a covenant with him. He says, I'm going to do this through you. You're going to be blessed. But then his name, he gets this name, deceiver. And I don't either, again, he doesn't know what this is about or he doesn't believe it because the first thing he does is try to get what's already his. God already said, I'm going to do this for you. And he doesn't trust God to do it for him. So he tries to make it happen in his own strength instead of trusting God. That's like the first thing he does.
Hmm.
Do you see how he did that? It's like he doesn't trust God. So the two things that are really happening is he doesn't know who he is and he doesn't trust God. And so because he doesn't know who he is and doesn't trust God, he starts acting to get that which he already has. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
He starts trying to make it happen instead of trusting the Lord right off the bat. And then what happens? He takes off and ends up hanging out with Laban. Well, what happens with Laban in that whole narrative? What's the situation there?
Yeah. Well, he kind of gets tricked in the whole Laban
Yes,
issue.
yes.
He ends up with
Like he gets
two
tricked,
ladies
and
to
then what
try to
happens?
take care of.
Yes, like he gets tricked, and then he tricks Laban.
Yeah.
He's like right back at you, and he ends up in this manipulative, weird sort of "I gotcha and you got me" situation. Not only that, but he ends up with 2 wives who can't stand each other. Like his whole family is massively dysfunctional now because there's all this like suspicion and antagonism in his house.
Mm-hmm.
All going back to because he simply didn't trust God to do what God said he was going to do and tried to
Wow.
make it happen in his own strength. So that sets you up for this part of the narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is his life. So far, we're looking at someone who doesn't trust God, is to do what he said, and is instead attempting to do it in his own strength through unrighteous means that have caused now all kinds of problems, and also probably delayed the promise like a lot longer than it actually needed to be. So now he finds himself in a situation where he's supposed to be ruling over his brother, but that hasn't occurred, right? That he calls himself Esau's servant. And in fact, that's the case. Esau is way more blessed than Jacob. It's so weird to me when I hear people talk about this. They don't ever mention what the Bible actually says. They're just like, oh, yeah, Jacob is better and God blessed him. I'm like, that's not actually what happened.
Yeah.
you know,
Esau was pretty wealthy. Esau had a
yeah,
pretty nice life.
he's hanging out. He's wealthy enough to be hitting the road with 400 guys. Like, he has so much stuff that he's like, I don't even need your stuff. Like, Jacob comes over and goes, hey, man, I'm giving you all this stuff, so please don't kill me. And Esau's like, I don't need your stuff, man. Like, eventually he takes it, but he's like, only because Jacob wouldn't give it up. I wouldn't stop telling him. But Esau's like, I'm so wealthy, I don't need your stuff. Like, that's where I'm at. So I've often joked about this. It's like Jacob I loved and Esau I hated. I was like, I would love some of God's hatred right there. If God's hatred means you're the most blessed person in the land, and the blessed guy serves you,
Yeah, that's not a bad place to be. Yeah.
Yeah, like God's hatred doesn't all that bad. Which we talked about, of course, hatred in the context simply means he chose Jacob for greater intimacy and to bring the Messiah through his line, whereas Esau was not chosen for that. And ultimately, Esau's descendants settled in the land of Edom, and the Edomites were completely wiped out. In fact, through a judgment of God that, in fact, when I came and taught over this weekend down in North Carolina, I actually quoted the passage where that was prophesied, that Edom was going to be destroyed. And Edom was, in fact, destroyed. There are no Edomites today. The last Edomite we know of was Herod, and he was probably like half Edomite.
Wow.
Or maybe, like a 1/8 Edomite, like everyone thinks they are Cherokee, which they're not. But anyway.
So true. So true.
Yeah. Everyone out there, sorry to burst your bubble. I really don't mean to be offensive here. If you think you're Cherokee, you're not.
Yeah. I visited Cherokee, North Carolina. I bought some turquoise. I think I'm Cherokee now. Yeah, I got you.
No, if you're Cherokee, you are a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee tribe or another derivative. If you're not a member of the tribe, you are not Cherokee. It's some weird lore that got sent down through the ages. You are, sorry to burst your bubble, but that's 95% of the time you're not Cherokee in any have anything to do with that at all. That's neither here nor there. But
that's 23, but not me. So
yeah, exactly. If you're not a member of a native tribe, there's a 98% likelihood you have no native blood at all. So, anyways, I know you think you're Cherokee. Sorry, you're not. I sound more like Paul than John right there.
Welcome to this side.
Yes.
So then we see right after he feels this way, Jacob's kind of sending people forward in fear, but right before he meets with his brother, this is where we see him wrestling.
Yes. This is the key right here. So right before he ends up meeting with his brother is when we get this whole wrestling with God incident. And I think this might get a little graphic here. I'm going to, so I guess, do you want to read that part? The whole wrestling part of the narrative?
Starting with 24. Genesis 32:24. Then Jacob was left alone. Let me read that again, by the way. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. How far do you want me to go?
I'll just keep going.
Then he said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." He said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him and said, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place, I'm going to screw this up, Peniel.
Peniel.
For he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved."
Yeah, it literally means the face of God. Peniel. Anytime you see L in a word, most of the time that's L. L is God in Hebrew. So that literally means the face of God.
Okay. All right.
Yep. Okay, so first of all, a little anatomy lesson here and a little lesson in Hebrew. I learned this from my Hebrew prof. So he broke this thing down in terms of, let's just talk about, before we get into like the actual theology of the narrative and what it could possibly mean. If you go to, if you look at, people always think it's this hip socket that's being dislocated. You've heard that, right? And that's how it's translated here. So I had my Hebrew professor. His name's Dr. Hess. And so, of course, he's fluent in Hebrew. And I'm not really that good with the Hebrew. Everyone, I am good with the Greek. I'm not that good with the Hebrew. But I do remember him talking about this. And he looks at all of us and he goes, and my prof says, "Hey, guys, I just want you to know that's not his hip socket." And we're kind of like, okay. And so what he told me was this, that the Hebrew words that are translated socket, which is pronounced cap, and then the other word that's translated hip, which is in Hebrew pronounced yarek. Basically what he said is that every single other place in the entire Old Testament, these two words are associated with things that are like flesh and muscle, not bone. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So where he translates the word thigh in 24:9, Yadek is not that. It's almost every other time in Genesis is associated with something that has to do with a muscle or the flesh. So you're going to get this in a second, Keith. I think it's going to be funny. So here we go. So we don't actually know the exact parts of the body that the author is necessarily referring to. However, and it's weird because he talks about like, Jews today don't eat meat in this place or something in the passage. You know what I mean? So that never even made it into Jewish law. Like that's never a thing. That's the only mention of it, and nobody ever even did that. And then the word translated tendon, or sometimes translated tendon, is gid hanashe, which is the only place it's ever used. So it's really hard to know exactly what they're talking about. But if you're going to translate it, it's probably would be translated fleshly appendage. Okay, so now that I've given you my Hebrew prof's take on what that actually is, are you connecting the dots at all?
Yeah. Do you want me to put it in Apostle Paul terms?
I do. Put it in Apostle Paul terms.
God kicked him in the nuts, man.
Yes, that's exactly right. And there's a reason for that. So in other words, so it literally says, if you're going to read it in the Hebrew, again, according to my Hebrew prof, so take it up with him, and he knows way more than I do, and way more than any of our listeners do. I guarantee you that. This guy's a Rhodes Scholar. He said it means that he punched him in his fleshly appendage. So,
wow.
yeah. So, and he said, my prof said, the reason that he did that was because the fleshly appendage of which we're referring to, that he punched him in the groin, you could actually translate a punch him in the groin, was because that was the place of his fruitfulness. And he
Hmm.
had not trusted God, right? He had not trusted God for the fruitfulness and had done it in his own strength. And God's like, I'm going to make sure you can't even get it from your own strength anymore. And you're going to have to get it from me because I've been giving you all this time to trust me at my word. I've been giving you all this time for you to trust me. And he punches him in the Johnson.
Wow.
He punches him right in his little Israel. So, was that too crass? Sorry, if we have younger listeners, I don't know.
I
How's
gotta,
that?
I
You
gotta
okay?
recover from that one, man.
You're
Oh my
okay
God.
over there.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
So, so again, not my fault. This is my Hebrew prof that told us this, and yeah, he actually read it to us in the Hebrew, like word for word. It was like, this is what it means. He said they don't like to translate it like this, but he's like, he punched him. He punched him right there.
Wow,
so, so what is that about?
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So still, it seems like the wrestle is with a few things. I mean, obviously, it's a wrestle with God, but he was alone. It says he was alone.
Yes.
And then now, certainly, he can be alone, and Christ can appear, God can appear.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But what I wondered is Jacob's wrestle truly with somebody external to himself, or was
Mm-hmm.
this a direct struggle in that moment with his own identity?
Yeah, I'm pushed to go with the latter, and there has been so many theories about this because it says he wrestled with a man.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing we see, and then later on he's like, clearly there's something weird going on, like supernatural, because he begins to be like, well, this is God, but he's not necessarily saying this is God. It's more like this is from God or has something to do with
Mm-hmm.
the supernatural. Then whatever the supernatural part, you know, punches him in the area of tenderness. you know,
But this goes
um,
back to where I was saying: is he himself the man with which he wrestled?
yeah, I think that's quite possible. Like, of course, people say, well, this is a Christophany, which would be a manifestation of Jesus in the Old Testament, which I think would be kind of strange because we don't really see Jesus acting in this way at any point. Like during his life, we don't see him like tackle somebody or you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Start like smacking him around. Like you just don't really see Jesus doing that. He's more of a cuddler.
yeah, he's
Thanks a
not
lot,
doing the
Paul.
suplex, that's for sure.
No, no, and you don't really see him doing that or acting in this way. Some people say, well, this is an angel from God. That's certainly probably more likely than a Christophany. I think it's more likely it would be an angel. And some people are like, well, it's God Himself, of which I really would doubt, because you're trying to tell me like God can't take Jacob, like Jacob, like Jacob's like Andre the Giant and just won't let God Hulk Hogan out of his grasp or something. I
Yeah,
don't know. It's a really strange thing. But if you think of it as actually he is alone and a man wrestled with him, it is kind of like wrestling with that part of him that is how would you put it? Wrestling with that part of him that's called by God, or wrestling with that part of him that should be walking in the covenant promises and isn't. And he's coming to terms with that part of him that needs to finally surrender to the will of God and let God do it. Does that
yeah,
make sense?
yeah. And if that's the case, I mean, it would still make sense. I don't know exactly how, but I mean, you could probably still make a case for the crotch shot there based on how you
Right.
defined it, not just necessarily as a crotch shot, but what that represented.
Mm-hmm.
Fruitfulness on my own behalf, or
Right.
in today's term, I have to earn it to become something instead of realizing who he's already made me and reflect it.
Exactly. Exactly. And guess what you see throughout all of Genesis? You see men primarily who just didn't trust God. You know what I mean? God would
Yeah.
make a promise, God would make a covenant, and then you would see them acting in ways where they really didn't trust God to do what he said he would do. And would act in ways that would, you know, working in their own flesh, like working in their own strength, as opposed to really trusting God for what he had promised them. You see all the way through Genesis a very consistent narrative of people just simply, I mean, from the very beginning, all the way through Exodus, you have people. Moses disappears for like 10 minutes and they're like, oh, praise, Ra. I mean, I was like, dude, he's been gone for like an hour. Like, we're
Yeah.
already making calves. It's like, why? Because they don't trust God. I mean, it's just over and over again. Like, God makes a covenant. He says what he's going to do. And they go, yeah. And then go, no. We actually would rather trust what we're going to do. And what's so bizarre to me is it's the same dang spirit now.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm glad that we only saw that in Genesis and a little bit of Exodus, but not the case.
No. Is it not the same thing that Paul wrote against in most of his books?
Yeah.
Like, they're trying to get their holiness through circumcision or keeping the Sabbath or whatever the heck it was. And Paul's like, stop, it's Christ alone. And then now in the church, it's like, no, you can't, you're not really holy. Jesus didn't really do it. He just gave you an access point. And now you've got to work your tush off in order to finally be acceptable to the Lord.
Think about that.
Lack of trust.
I had never thought about it in these terms, I think, before. I had realized this was the case, but not in these terms. In order to believe something other than the simple gospel,
Mm-hmm.
you not only have to believe that you are not who you are through Jesus, but you essentially have to believe that Jesus also is not who he said he is or could do what he said he did. Because if you truly believe he's God, then he didn't fail.
That's right. There's no way he could fail at his task.
Yeah.
And that's what's being taught in the church right now. Even though they won't actually say that, although some do,
Yeah.
A lot of that spirit of religion taught that Jesus failed to bring the kingdom, and so therefore it's postponed until the millennium and things like that. Jesus didn't fail. It would be impossible for Jesus to fail because he's absolutely perfect in every way. Only we can fail. Like, Jesus can't fail. He can't sin, so therefore he can't fail.
Yeah. Wow.
We fail. We mess up. We fail when we sin. But he didn't sin, so he can't fail. There's no way he can not do what he sets out to do because he fully trusts God. Therefore, it will always happen.
So really, this is the same wrestle that's happening today within so many of those who love Jesus. They just don't realize what he did to them and for them. And if I read, because of that, I think it's really kind of neat if we read 26, 27, and 28 when he says, listen, I'm not letting you go.
Yeah.
Not until you bless me.
Right.
What he doesn't do, if you notice, he doesn't say, okay, well, here's your blessing. I'm going to bless you even the more. Here's 38 more promises for you.
Right.
He asks him a very simple question. What is your name?
Yeah.
What is your identity? And Jacob says, well, my identity is deceiver. But that's not what the answer is. The answer is, your name shall no longer be deceiver, but Israel. Because you've striven with God and with men and have prevailed. In other words, this is your real identity. Someone who has seen me face to face.
That's good.
And that I am with in intimacy.
That's good. Yeah, that's so good. I didn't even think about that, but that is what he's saying. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. He asked him the question, what's your name? That is what he's saying. Who are you? And he says, this is who I am. And God goes, that's not who you are. This is who you are. And people say one who strives with God. The intimation wasn't like that you wrestled with God and strove with God. The idea is that you looked at him face to face, which is why he called that place Peniel, which just means face to face with God. So like, you're not a liar. You're actually the one who gets to see me face to face.
And to me, that says one of, if not both of two things. Number one, either the greatest blessing you can have that Jacob could have had
Mm-hmm.
would be to know who he is because of his relationship with God, because of
Mm-hmm.
that covenant relationship. That's the greatest blessing. And then secondly,
Yeah.
if anything more than that, would be the only thing you need to have in order to be blessed, in order to have all of the other promises, is just to realize who you actually are.
Yeah.
And if that's the case,
Mm-hmm.
guess what, church? Realize who you are
Mm-hmm.
because of him. Stop trying to
Mm-hmm.
become something you're not, because you can never become something you're not. You
Mm-hmm.
can reflect who he now made you to be.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's what the bottom line. Isn't it interesting how we see the same simple gospel from Genesis through Revelation? It's the same simple gospel over and over again. Would you trust me? Would you believe what I said? Would you believe what I said about you? Would you believe what I said about me? In other words, would you believe who God says he is? And therefore, would you believe who God says you are? And if both of those things line up with reality, you will walk and live in a way that reflects heaven, that reflects kingdom identity and kingdom principles on the earth. Like, it's just that simple.
Wow. So one more thing came to mind. We're getting near an hour, and I think that we actually may have covered this topic in one episode.
We did it. That was awesome.
Write it down, America and other countries.
Yeah.
So here's one other thing that came to mind.
Okay.
I thought it was interesting. In John, first chapter, 46th, 47th, 48th verse,
Okay.
where Jesus meets Nathanael, or Nathanael meets Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And Nathanael said to him, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him and said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit."
Mm-hmm.
Nathanael said to him, "How do you know me?" And Jesus answered and said to him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." But if, keeping in mind what we just talked about with Jacob wrestling and what Jacob's identity was, I almost see this now as an identity statement to speaking into who Nathanael is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hey, I see this is who you are. That's why Nathanael's response wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
because, he could have told him, "Oh, I got a buddy Nathanael I want you to meet." But it was after he made that statement that Nathanael said, "How do you know me?
Mm-hmm.
Who I actually am?"
Mm-hmm.
So he
Well,
saw into him. He knows him.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what's so cool about that, everything you're saying is in the Greek, it comes even more clear. When he says, "Behold, an Israelite indeed," what he's saying is there's a lot of Jews around here that are not Israelites. He said, "I found an Israelite indeed."
A remnant.
One who actually, yes, exactly saying. He's actually quoting from the Old Testament when he says, in the remnant, there will be no deceit. He's saying, I found, or no guile. You could translate like that too. An Israelite, he said, "I found an Israelite indeed." This is a true Israelite, one in whom there is no deceit, right? One who knows who he is. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like this is an Israelite indeed. Like that's a powerful statement he's making. He's actually hearkening back to saying, this is a member of the remnant. And remember when he says, "My sheep know my voice. I know my own." He's like, these are my own, the ones in whom there is no deceit. I know them and they know me. They know my voice. And this is one of them right here.
Isn't it neat that it seems to me that there's an absolute relationship, there's a connection between knowing who you are and knowing who God is. And in order to know one, it's almost like you have to know the other one. You
Yes.
have to know who you now
Yes.
are to truly understand who God is and what he did.
Yes.
And then conversely, you have to understand who he is and what he is
Yeah.
to understand who you now are. Like there,
Yeah.
it's a
Yes.
total circle there. You've got to get the whole
Yes.
picture of it.
And any lack of revelation at any level on either one of those things, or a lie believed, will inhibit one of those realities from manifesting in fullness.
Wow.
So if anything you believe about God is not true, it's a crutch. It will disable you in some way. Or if anything you believe about yourself that is not true, it will also act as a hampering, like something pounding against you all the time.
Huh.
It's the same kind of thing. Either one of those things that are not seen in fullness will not be experienced in fullness, and therefore all the promises will not manifest. So when we see things like he who believes, these signs will follow him. Well, he who believes what? Like understands who Jesus is and understands who they are will be able to heal people. So to me, it goes back to like, well, why can't we heal people? Well, I don't know the answer to that all the time with every situation, but I know at least some of it has something to do with who we believe God is and who we believe we are. That's got to be a component of it.
Yeah. Well, thus the faith that moves mountains.
Yes.
I don't think that's
God
just
is.
faith in who God is. It's got to be faith in what you can now do because of that.
Exactly. It's like, do we really believe? I mean, that's the bottom line. It's not even believing like in the healing, right? It's believing in you and believing in the God that promised you could do this.
Who said, do it? He didn't just promise. He told you to do it.
He said, go do it. He didn't say pray for the sick. He said, heal the sick. Yeah. Now, later on, James talks about praying for the sick, but Jesus himself said, heal the sick.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there it is. Well, now that we've reached a little over an hour, my challenge to everybody is if you don't know who you are, if you don't know who God is, if you don't know who you are in him, because of him, and only because of him, then I'm asking you now, I'm challenging you, I'm actually praying that you wrestle with that very thing. Yep. And that you get the same message Jacob did. Who are you? And realize now who you are.
Yes.
Any parting words?
Well, it's really important that you know who you are, because you don't want God to give you a crotch shot. So, if that isn't deep. Right?
Hey, by the way, for the record, that's more of a Paul thing to do than a John thing to do.
It totally is. That's such a Pauline. That's a Pauline epistle. If I ever heard one.
Oh, man. Well, listen, if you have anything you want us to cover, anything that you're curious about, please send those over. And one way you can do that is?
Go to unleashedministries.net. and click on Ask Me, or you go to my Facebook page, either one.
And it's highly important that when you go to Unleashed Ministries, it is .net, not .com. Last week, I sent a text to like 30 people saying .com, and not realizing I had done that, and until Jake goes, it's .net.
Yeah,
I'm like, thanks, man.
It's because we're believers. It's fishing net. Right, so just think of it like that.
Oh, I love it.
We catch the fish in the net.
That's huge.
Not
man.
communist,
Oh man. Well, if for some reason you go, I need more than one place to look, because I can't type .net. My fingers want to type .com. You can reach out to rocksaltcoaching.com and contact us or our Facebook page as well. And we look forward to hearing from you. But with that, we love you all. Thanks for spending some time with us, and we'll catch you next episode.